move on. We'll leave the same team here. Welcome, Teresa.
Kia ora koutou. So the purpose of the report is to report back the Treaty Audit Response Work Programme in response to the PwC findings that came to the Finance and Performance Committee meeting on the 24th of July. So we have 13 new recommendations in total. We have accepted the findings and recommendations. There is an appendix with the condensed work programme in the back, and I'm happy to answer your questions.
David, I know you have a question. Yep.
No. Just want to say support the role of the Wakaroa Group in overseeing the delivery and the closure of the treaty audit recommendations, and that the board certainly looks forward to discussing the response program at the next joint meeting with the governing body. And on that basis, I'm happy to move.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, all right. Seconder? Councillor Fletcher? Yep. Okay. Any further questions? We're all fairly silent here today. We're bang on time. Okay, we have a move and a second. I'll put that. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? Thank you, team.
Thank you.
Magura, Graham, Teresa, Rose. Right. 10:30, and we are ready. Auckland Transport. And we have Robert. Is Robert and Ross here? Are they? Do you want to introduce Robert or no?
I think Transport can go straight up.
Okay. Oh, Shane, welcome.
Kia ora, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity. First of all, I'd like to make apologies on behalf of Chairman Dr. Levy. He's been struck down late yesterday with illness, so he was unable to make it this morning. So, as I say, he passes on his apologies. This morning.
Introductions for those who don't know.
Yes, I was going to do that.
Okay.
So with me this morning, this morning I was just going to introduce two new colleagues who have joined the executive leadership at Auckland Transport. Mark Lang, who's the Executive General Manager of Finance, and on my left is Vanessa Ellis, who is the new Executive General Manager Customer Experience. Mark's been with us since mid-July, and Vanessa's been with us about September. So we're very, very pleased to have both of them on board. This morning I thought I'd just make some opening remarks and then take you through the presentation, and then I understand there may be some questions on the report and with respect to the letter from the Mayor in relation to the SOI. So if that's okay with you, Mr. Chair. So for the end of year results to the 30th of June, many of these have been canvassed in our just published annual report. While some that has been out for a few weeks now, it is still important to note and acknowledge significant progress across a number of areas, including public transport, the delivery of our capital program, and a renewed focus on internal culture and engagement. We'd also like to take this opportunity to reconfirm AT's absolute commitment in the area of safety and road safety in particular. Going forward, there'll be a significant focus on speed management and localised engineering improvements to intersections. And on behalf of the Auckland Transport, both the executive and the board, we sincerely thank councillors for their unanimous endorsement of this program at the recent Planning Committee. It's obviously a challenging agenda that we have, an ambitious agenda in terms of transport, and we are very much committed to doing this with vigour, confidence, and a very clear direction set by council and government. And most importantly for us, for for the first time, we have the funding to make that happen. So once again, councillors, we thank you for your support and for the commitment you show to Auckland as a whole. In terms of the presentation on the screen, if we just quickly go through that, I know time's of the essence, but if we go through that and move to the first slide, which is there, you'll see that for the year ended 30th of June 2017-18, we met or exceeded 24 of the 36 SOI targets. We're still having significant growth in PT, which is about 4.4%. For those of you who don't have international benchmarks to measure that by, that is quite incredible across most other cities in the world, as compared with most other cities in the world. We also, in terms of capital program, the electric trains met a significant milestone in June, and they are on track to be delivered, start being delivered in late 2019. Sadly, the DSI, deaths and serious injuries on our roads, remains high through to the end of June, but activities now well underway to implement a number of interventions in 2018-19, and that's a ramp up of from 25 million last financial year to around 55 million this financial year, and the team have done an excellent job in a short space of time to plan that work. If we move to the slides 3, 4 and 5, I just wanted to loop back to conversations that we'd had with you at the last Finance and Performance meeting. There is a number of initiatives that Vanessa and Joe Stansfield, the Group Manager Customer Services, are undertaking to improve our responsiveness to customers on a wide variety of issues, either complaints or feedback that we're getting on the Auckland Transport Network, whether that's roads, public transport, walking and cycling, or anything else that we're involved in. And I won't go through all of those, but if we go to slide 5, which has got a range of graphs on it, the graph in the top left will show you that in March this year, we were only responding to the calls we were getting within the SLA target, which is within 20 seconds, which is industry best practice in industry, 41% of the time. Okay, in March. There has been a staggering improvement and a real focus around improving that. We hit 79% in August, and what is not on that graph is that in September that number is now 87%, well above the target in the SLA. So I think that's quite an impressive achievement from particularly Jo and her team. You'll also see a reduction in the number of abandoned calls and a significant, you won't see it up there, but there has been a significant reduction in the number of aged cases. It is not where we want to be, let's be clear. We have more work to do, but I hope you recognise that this is a significant step in the right direction in terms of how we are interfacing with our customers in terms of feedback. If we move to the next slide, which is around organisation development and capability, we're very cognisant of the demand from stakeholders for the transformation and improvement in culture of AT. There's a lot of activity been underway this year. Obviously, my 2 new colleagues have joined. We have 2 more due to join us on November the 12th, including Brian Sherritt, who's the new Executive General Manager Safety out of Victoria in Australia, and Natasha Whiting, who's the new EGM Culture and Transformation. In terms of organisation development and capability, it's also important to recognise the work that we're doing in terms of diversity and inclusion. We are the first CCO and the first transport organisation to have received Rainbow Tick accreditation. So that is about creating an environment where people can feel comfortable working in our organisation and also be more representative of the communities we serve. Lastly, in terms of the organisation development and capability, again, I'd like to loop back to the dialogue and the engagement we had with you last time at the Finance and Performance Committee, where you raised the concerns about regional fuel tax and whether AT had the capability and capacity to deliver on the initiatives that are being funded through regional fuel tax, but not just regional fuel tax, through ATAP funding. And I'd just like to cover off a few things in this regard. So the next slide has the capital program for AT between 2015-16, the actuals, through to the forecast capital program through to 2020-21. We've excluded CRL from this capital program. You may recall that in 15-16 in particular, CRL was under AT. We've excluded that. But what that graph highlights from my perspective is two things. AT has been on a pathway since 2015-16 of increasing its capital program delivery. It's not as if we're just going all of a sudden making a big step up. We are on a pathway, and we've been on that pathway for a period of time. However, we do need to acknowledge that it is we are needing to ramp up, particularly 2019-20 and 2020-21. Further out into the future, 2023-24, something like that, it grows to about 1.2 billion. So yes, there is a significant capital program, and yes, you're right to ask the questions last time about capability and capacity. There's two elements in terms of capability and capacity. That's our internal capability and capacity, and the external capability and capacity. And I'll talk to those two things separately. In the next slide, which probably answers some of the questions you will have about our workforce and the growth in the workforce and FTEs at Auckland Transport. The graph on the left shows the growth in full-time equivalent employees and contractors since 2013-14, I think it is. And you'll see, yes, that has been growing. But it largely correlates to the graph you've just seen about the capital program. Is one key driver of it. The second key driver of it is there is a number of activities that have been insourced to Auckland Transport to deliver efficiency and value for money. Two examples of that are the contact service centres at places like Britomart and New Lynn, which there was split delivery between the rail operator and AT, and we've removed that duplication, but it has meant that while AT's full-time equivalents have gone up, there has been reductions in the payments to third-party providers. So that's one. The second is around transport officers in terms of security and safety on the rail network. The second graph on your right highlights particularly the green line. Since April this year, you will see that the number of FTEs is flattened out or is slightly reducing. In September, I can tell you that that number is reduced again by another 33 FTEs. So it has flattened out or is slightly reducing. I do want to manage your expectations though. The reality is with that capital program growing and more people living in Auckland, there'll be more demand for services. And so it's not that there'll be a huge drop-off in the amount of people we employ at Auckland Transport, but it will be about having people doing the right jobs to deliver what is in the RLTP and the programs that are in regional fuel tax. The second part of capability and capacity is about our supply chain. For those of you, and you're probably not aware, but 75 to 80% of the money in our capital program actually gets delivered by third-party suppliers. Civil construction companies, professional services companies. So 80%. We are very, very dependent upon particularly private sector to deliver what you've asked us to deliver over the next 10 years. We also know that right now there's lots of activity going on in Auckland, whether it's CRL not being delivered by AT, whether it's KiwiRail in terms of Third Main, Papakura to Pukekohe, whether it's NZTA with light rail. There is a that's just transport. There is a swathe of activity going on across Auckland in a city that's growing. And that's without even looking at the east coast of Australia. Sydney and Melbourne have an infrastructure pipeline which is enormous. And we are competing with those cities in terms of private sector to deliver the program. Just to that end, in terms of the next slide, you'll see a graph, and what it shows is the black line shows the pipeline of non-residential consents in Auckland versus the rest of the country. It is quite staggering in terms of what you see in Auckland compared to everywhere else, apart from Christchurch where you've got the rebuild, obviously. But that shows you the challenge we have in terms of activity in Auckland for construction and professional services resources. With that in mind, in early August this year, we did an industry briefing. We had 100 professional services and civil contracting providers come to AT, and we told them about what was in front of them. We'd heard a lot of noise in the media, particularly about there being uncertainty or a lack of confidence about what the pipeline was. We wanted to bring them in, and we did that to lay out what the program was. It was after you had that regional fuel tax was confirmed, and we also wanted their views on how they could help us deliver the program, not just what we thought, but what they thought. The key insights which come from that is they want that pipeline updated regularly, and we will do that every 6 months so they have visibility about what's coming to market. The second thing was around the procurement model. They want us to be more agile, and they want to do more than go from year to year. They want to talk about 3 to 5 year programs where that way they can invest in people, invest in plant, and actually commit to the work that we have. For AT, it means they want better clarity around our organisation, who they deal with, and for us to be more responsive. So they're the main things. We have pushed with them very much that we see this investment not only as delivering transport outcomes, but delivering a lot of other benefits that are in the Auckland plan, such as through social procurement, such as through sustainability, such as through safety. That's the presentation. I hope that kind of, I just want to close the loop in terms of some of the topics that came up last time. Happy to take any questions.
Councillor Simpson.
Look, thank you, Shane. You've certainly highlighted some wonderful success, so that's really, really great. Thank you for that, and you can be proud of that. Look, I'm just going to keep my questions short to 3. First one is on, and I'm going to try and highlight the positives, sort of. On the network optimisation, on the arterial road productivity. So you've exceeded your target of 55%, that's fantastic, reaching 65%. So what's the relationship between the arterial road productivity and safety? And is the increased focus on safety likely to have an impact on this measure?
Through the chair, I'll answer that question. If I understand it, you're asking about whether or not productivity is going to be impacted by the focus on safety. Probably the answer to that is simply no. The focus on productivity is about how effectively we're moving people down our roading corridors, predominantly focusing on our arterial corridors. So that means that our focus is around, if you look, we've got a very ambitious program around bus priority lanes and transit lanes. That's not impacted predominantly from a safety perspective, but as we roll out more bus lanes, more T2, T3 lanes, we get a far more productive road corridor. We're able to move more people in the same amount of time or less time. So I don't believe that there's actually a strong correlation between our productivity measure and the safety focus that we have as an organisation. There is some correlation, and everything we do is about trade-offs between safety and people moving around a network. And there's a balance that needs to be struck around all of that.
I suppose I was talking about if you're going to have to slow that traffic down. Correlation.
So I think we've, that question's been asked many, many times. If the question is around specifically the speed focus that we have as part of the safety focus, it's a challenging question to answer. I think the answer is actually no, but it's different on different corridors depending on where we're focusing. So the first thing to state is that this is not about, our speed program is not about just going and changing speeds everywhere, carte blanche, regardless. It's about actually understanding where the risk is on our network and focusing our efforts in the speed space and for that matter, all the other interventions around where that risk exists. So in some corridors, there may be some impact, but overall, there are a number of studies that have been done, and NZTA has done a study that actually suggests that vehicles travelling at a harmonised speed, albeit slower, delivers a better outcome in terms of journey experience and travel time experience through a corridor, as opposed to vehicles speeding up or trying to go faster. So I don't believe that our focus on safety and our speed efforts in particular, on the whole, will have any significant or measurable impact on our productivity or the experience that customers have on our network.
Okay, thank you for that. My second question is around cycling. So last year you built 6.5 kilometres of cycleways at a cost of nearly 42 million, which is about $4.5 thousand a metre. Your target was 10 kilometres. What was holding you back from delivering the 10 kilometres?
There's probably a number of factors that are holding us back, but it's probably fair to say that the most significant factor is that our cycle program, our ambitious cycle program for delivery, in that we as an organisation have underestimated the extent to which we need to engage with local communities around particularly the placemaking function that they're seeking as part of those active modes, particularly the cycling and the walking projects that we're looking to deliver. So what we observed last year is a number of projects stalled or stopped, not stopped, but stalled, really, because we have not acknowledged or taken that on board early enough in the piece. So we've had to do a complete rethink around how we roll out, how we deliver our cycle programs, our projects into the future, and they need to have a far more significant focus on placemaking, is what the communities that we're working in are telling us. We cannot simply bowl in and put some green paint on a road that is not delivering an outcome that communities expect from cycling.
Okay, thank you for that. So my next question follows that quite well, because we did 6 cycleway projects last year, 6.5 kilometres, 42 million. 4 of those 6 were in the Waitemata area, the city, and yet cycling counts in the city centre was 1% under targets. Do you think it's would be more efficient if we started to monitor people, an increase in people using the cycleways, or is that something you're looking at? I mean, we're building these cycleways, but how do we prove to people that this investment, and your investment last year was pretty high, 42 million almost, 41,900,000. How do we know, how's that value for money? How can we prove that cyclists are using them and that it's actually, good value for money?
Yeah, so through you, Chair. There's just to add to before I answer the second question, the other issue that we had last year is you'll recall that ATAP and the ATAP process was ongoing through February, March and April. So there was some uncertainty about the program until it was locked down at the end of April. And there was a couple of big projects in terms of cycling that we were waiting for certainty around that process, and we held until we were comfortable. And one of those was Newland to Avondale, which is now in the market and out for tender, and the other one was GI to Tamaki in terms of, so they're progressing. They're outside, obviously, Waitemata.
My understanding is, though, with respect, that these are just cycleways. These aren't shared paths. The cycleway figures that I have are only cycleways, they're not shared paths. GI to Tamaki is a shared path.
A number of our cycleways are shared paths. I mean, if you want to reference the specific ones, I can perhaps comment on them, but a number of them are actually shared paths.
But so you're telling me that the what you've written in here, 6.5 kilometres of new cycleways aren't just cycleways, they are shared paths. Some of them are shared paths.
That's correct.
Right. Okay. You should probably say that they're shared paths because they're not just cycleways. Okay, my last question is around footpath quality, which seems to always be a bone of contention. People don't think that their footpaths are up to speed, and it's very poor in terms of customer satisfaction. So how do you plan to address this?
Yeah, through the Chair. Tony McCartney, Group Manager, Assets and Maintenance. The asset management plan's looking at the footpath quality issue. We have a regime where we rate footpaths at the moment, according to a rating, a quality rating. The issue we're dealing with, I think, primarily is around the issues around the safety component of that. We look at primarily from a quality point of view, from a trip hazard, but clearly there's the expectation in the community that we need to improve the aesthetic and the placemaking component around that, which is the piece of work that's going on in the asset management team at the moment.
Shane, as a follow-up, you do measurement on cyclists, it seems, but on the shared paths, are you doing measurements on other users of the shared paths? Because, as Councillor Simpson indicates, I think that would be pretty useful, because some of us are a little bit cynical about cycle lanes as compared to shared paths. Some of us would believe that shared paths are going to get much more use, cyclists, walkers, pushing babies, taking your dog, whatever.
I'm not in the cynical brigade. I don't want to be in that brigade.
As compared, so do you do the comparison to see the usage? So
Chair, no, we don't at this particular point in time, but it is an issue that is not unique to Auckland, and I think we are currently considering how we might better capture the number of users other than cyclists on shared paths around Auckland.
I just pass on, like in the Defoe ward, you know, we've got the Defoe Coastal Walkway. That's not your responsibility, although you're involved, but can't help but notice the usage of that seems to be way greater than some of the pure cycling paths that we have. So anyway, something to go forward on. Right, we have a good list here. Councillor Darby, Mayor Goff, Councillor Walker, Watson, Fletcher, Cooper, Stewart and Newman.
Thanks, Chair. And look, sorry to interrupt, but I just don't want to be one of the some of us questioning the success of cycling, and it's mammoth gains we're making in that front. So thank you, team. Just a couple of areas, and maybe if I could, it's probably with Andrew Allen and Chair. We're doing the quarterly update to the end of June here. But then we've got some more recent information as well. You'd prefer us to dwell more on the quarterly update or both crossing over?
Yeah, I think crossing over is relevant.
Okay. So just in terms of crossing over into road safety, you've heard us express some concern, us I think as a whole, me and myself, on the lack of capability of police to monitor our capital investment of coming up 12 cameras and then 18, etc. And I understand that there were some meetings last week with police. Do you have any updates that you can convey at this meeting that you've learned from police and their planning going forward?
I would have given you some pretty good updates, I believe, but I understand that there's been some recent rethinking from a police perspective, so I'm happy to share with you where we kind of landed in terms of the workshop, but it is still a moving feast, so it's still work in progress and ongoing. But the work in our workshop of last week has essentially focused on a short-term intervention which looks at opportunities to utilise alternative systems to the Police Infringement Bureau system for the enforcement of red light cameras. And I'm referring specifically here to systems that AT already has in place and uses currently for enforcement. So we've explored that a bit further with Police and Ministry of Transport and NZTA at the workshop last week. And that was a very positive meeting, and there was a lot of support for us looking at that as an option to close a gap. And the reason I say close a gap, I'll put that into context in a minute. But that was looked at and supported by and large as an opportunity to look at to close the gap for us, utilising systems that we already have in place. I understand there might have been a bit of a rethink with police over the course of the last week, and I don't have the detail of that update right now, but I'm happy to come back to you or anyone else with where that lands. There's a meeting planned for Friday down in Wellington with police, and the news is actually quite good, I understand. I believe there's been a bit of I understand there's been a bit of a rethink with police around this, and they're wanting now to suggest a further alternative to the topics discussed at our workshop from last week. So it's all positive. What I'm reading out of all of that, Councillor, is that there's a very significant focus on the ability to enforce red light cameras, and I'm seeing some really good ideas and some thinking coming from police, ourselves, MOT and NZTA, around how we actually do that more efficiently and effectively, not only in Auckland, but also looking forward to the rest of the country. So I talked about closing a gap. I just want to quickly come back to that at the risk of labouring this perhaps too much. MOT, NZTA and police are currently working on what it is that they need to do. So there's acknowledgement at a national level that the infringement system that police currently use and the whole process sitting in behind that needs some work. And so as a national initiative, they're looking at what they need to do to remedy that. I am advised that the horizon for that solution to be in place is somewhere between 18 months and 3 years. So what we are looking to do in the workshop that we had the other day that I've referred to is really looking to fix the issue that we've got between the now and that 18-month to 3-year horizon when there is a national solution that is brought in place to remedy this for the long term, if you like.
Okay. Look, I think you're on to it, and Shane and the team are working hard on that, so I appreciate you pushing that hard with Wellington. That's great. Just on road safety, I was at a local board last night, and your team brought evidence of the need to put in a signalised crossing. You had evaluated options. There had been 91 incidents on the stretch of road over the last 5 years, 3 serious injuries and 1 fatality at this exact location where your professional staff recommended, well, they weren't recommending, they were, in some ways, they were saying this needed to be done and it will be done. Yet the local board said, no, you have got it all wrong without bringing evidence. It concerns me. Now, this is not about just that meeting last night. Road safety is something you don't back away from, and we unanimously supported your program. Every man and woman around this table at that time, at the meeting, backed your program. I'm just wondering how, when you have the evidence, and we've asked you to make sure you come with evidence, and you've confirmed that, how you are going to deal with a part of this council, and it could be ourselves as councillors, who might say, don't like your evidence. Take my anecdotal evidence. How are you going to deal with that? Because I can see as of last night, that is going to be a problem, and I don't want on my watch another 70-year-old crossing the road and not getting to the other side.
Well, through the chair, thank you for that. I mean, I'm with you. None of us want that on our watch. So it's good that we are united in terms of that objective and that vision for our city moving forward. I suppose the answer to your question is that we've actually got to be bold, and if the evidence is there, we need to act on the evidence. For us, the challenge is in making sure that we do that in a way that is constructive with communities, with local boards, with councillors. And actually takes on board the feedback we get. It's all very well having the evidence and knowing that you need to do a piece of work. But through a meaningful engagement with our communities, with local boards, with councillors, often what we do learn is further things that can enhance the projects or the outcomes we're looking for. So I suppose, and I'm not familiar with the particular one you're referring to from last night, but in a situation like that, the direction that my team will take is to try and find win-win outcomes that certainly don't compromise the safety imperatives. So if we can learn and gain insights from that engagement with that local board, and we can enhance a piece of work that delivers in some way to the feedback they've provided us, or in totality to the information they've provided us, that's what we will aspire to do. I don't know if that answers your question. So we will try to work with communities to develop win-win outcomes. Where that's not achievable, if the evidence is there, we will need to press on if we're going to achieve our outcomes in terms of reducing death and serious injury on our networks. And that means that sometimes we won't have popular decisions or outcomes that we need to deliver, but it needs to be done.
Okay, thank you. And last question is in the bus and ferry area, and I commend you 3.5 million extra boardings to bus, which is the anchor room of PT. It's quite significant. And we've just got a slight falling back of 100,000 boardings in the ferry area. How much is the downtown, and I know we've got work in train and we hope to have that all downtown completed in 2021. How much is that a constraint? And can you just give us an update on the ferry procurement strategy and the ferry strategy overall? Is that about to land? And the regional public transport plan, the status of the regional public transport plan, is that about to be confirmed as well? Because I think that's all part of the mix in resolving some issues in ferry procurement.
Through you, Mr. Chairman. Morning, councillors. In response to the first question around downtown and the constraints around ferry, it is a constraint at the peak of the peak. There aren't some slots that we could potentially put in if we had the funding and if we had the spare resources to be able to do peak-on-peak services. When you get to the shoulder peak and off-peak, there obviously are some slots still available at downtown, which is why it's critical over the next few years as part of the downtown programme to not only facilitate the rest of the downtown programme by moving Piers 3 and 4 to the west side of Queen's Wharf, but also to ensure that we maintain like-for-like capacity and future-proof that for additional capacity post-America's Cup. So that's critical from a peak perspective. The things we are looking at, though, to try and grow ferry back to where it has been in the past, 4 to 5%, is how can we actually grow the off-peak services and particularly the weekend services. Funding is a constraint right now, but we're looking at how we can actually move some funding around, but also work with local developers such as in Hobsonville to see if we can get some developer contributions to offset public subsidy, which will help us to address the funding issue. So that's the immediate short-term aspects we're looking at. Sorry, what was your question?
Ferry strategy, a procurement strategy, and then the ferry strategy overall and the regional public transport plan.
So the ferry strategy, as you're probably aware, we've completed the first phase, which was a very high-level look at what are the opportunities and options available. It is very high level, it was aspirational, and that's been completed. What we are looking to do now is to move the services which we believe are fundamental in terms of both funding availability and also a reasonable step up in aspirational level of services into the regional public transport plan, which is obviously the formal consultation document for public transport. That will be available in November and December for public consultation around that level of service delivery. Post consultation in early next year, that's when we will complete the procurement strategy for that level of service.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Chair.
Right, we have 20 minutes and we have 9 more people wanting to ask questions, and my reckoning it's about 2 minutes each. So we go on to Meg Off.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Shane, for your presentation. I might ask Andrew Allen to come back to the table if I can, please. As you might have expected, my first question is to follow up on Chris Darby's statement, but first of all, congratulations on the continued progress on public transport usage. That's really important, and congratulations on your customer service improvements. Those figures are looking good. Look, on the red light cameras, I was pretty pissed off last week, as you probably imagined. You got a copy of my letter to the Minister, and you saw my comments in the paper. This council, I think, unanimously approved red light cameras on the basis it would improve safety. And then to find out that the police didn't have the capacity to enforce was a bit of a kick in the teeth. And my question was going to be, why are we spending $120,000 a camera if they're not going to enforce it and they're simply going to rotate? So I'm glad to hear the police have moved, not before time, and I'm glad to hear that you're following up, I hope, on the interim suggestion that I put to you last week. But what I really want to know is that in our renegotiation with the police around this, AT is taking a hard line. We're spending money that the central government should be spending by paying for these cameras. The least we can expect is for their people to do their job in enforcing them. So I just want assurance that you're taking a hard line on that. Andrew, that's in your court.
Through the Chair, Mr Mayor. We're taking a hard line. There is no doubt in my mind about the outcomes we need for Auckland. And often it seems like we're the lone voice in the wilderness when it comes to the importance of red light running as an issue in Auckland with our counterparts. Because I think the view across the board is that nationally it's not that significant an issue. So we are taking a hard line, but we're also making sure that we build a constructive relationship with police, with NZTA, with MOT. We have an ambitious program across the board if we're going to reduce death and serious injury across our network. That means we actually need to have a collaborative and a functional working relationship with all of those parties into the future if we're going to achieve those outcomes. Red light cameras is only one area that we're targeting. There are many more, and if we don't actually have a relationship and a positive, constructive, good relationship with those parties, it will make our task all that much more challenging into the future. But we are, to use a word that our CEO often quotes to all of us, we are unrepentant about some of the moves we need to make in Auckland, and particularly with respect to safety. So I don't ever find myself, nor do my team, find themselves apologising for the things we need to do. And getting on with enforcing red light running in Auckland is one of those things. And we are pushing the line hard on that.
Thank you, and I'm happy to be the hard cop, to excuse the pun, on that too. Part of our problem in road safety is the decrease in enforcement, police enforcement on the road in the last 3 or 4 years. My wider question is around the deaths and serious injuries, Mr Chairman, and the figures in this report are pretty awful. 8.4 deaths and serious injuries per 100 million vehicle kilometres compared to our target of 4.9, and we're getting worse at 3 times the rate of the rest of the country. The question I've got in this area, though, I'm happy to back, and I'm sure other councillors are as well, anything that you do that you can effectively bring down that road toll. But I want to be sure that when we've more than doubled the expenditure in the last 12 months, I want to be sure that we're putting that money into the right places, that we'll get the right effects. And I just wanted some reassurance. Speed limits are going to be very contentious. Where you can demonstrate bringing down the speed limit is necessary to save lives and stop crashes and injuries, fine. But are you going to have the hard evidence to back up the fact that where you lower the speed limit, that is because the evidence backs the fact that you will save lives and stop injuries?
Thank you for the question. The answer to that is very simple, yes. We absolutely do have the evidence, and I know that we have a meeting, a briefing with you on Friday to talk through some of that, particularly for the central city area. But I think I alluded to it a little earlier to one of the questions. We are not targeting speed management initiatives in areas across Auckland. We're targeting them, so it's not a carte blanche approach. It is targeted to an evidence base around risk. That is where we are focusing our efforts.
Yep. Okay, that's good. Thank you for that assurance. My last question, Mr Chair, is a year ago in the Regional Land Transport Plan, we were looking at new car registrations increasing by 800 a week. That was clearly set out in the report. There has been a dramatic reduction in new car registrations, so that for the last couple of months, for which I have statistics, it's increasing by less than 100 a month. Are you starting to see an impact on a lessening in the increase in congestion pressures on the road as a result of that, or do you see this as simply a sort of a one-off, a cyclical event? Because obviously that makes a big difference. If you're increasing by 800 or if you're increasing by 50 a month, that's going to have a hugely differential impact on our road congestion.
Through you, Chair. Mr Mayor, yes, we have noticed the decrease in new car registrations, but it's too early, or we haven't seen so far any change in the proxy for congestion we're using a lot of the time is vehicle kilometres travelled. We haven't seen that reduction as yet come through in terms of congestion.
Yeah. Do you have a clear explanation for that dramatic decrease? Because for several years it averaged 800 a month. Now there's been a sharp drop-off. I mean, I presume that there is some clear explanation for that, but I wondered whether you'd had any analysis done of it.
No, not so far.
Okay, it'd be interesting to follow that up. Thank you, Mr Chairman.
Councillor Wayne Walker.
First off, a question following up on the ferry strategy. Is the ferry strategy going to cover off a scenario as per, say, Sydney, where you've got ferries as a network, fit-for-purpose ferries that are able to interchange, so that we see a quantum leap in ferry service?
I don't think the ferries are necessarily fit for purpose in Sydney. You've got a number of different aged vessels which are actually Brisbane is probably a better example.
But they have a network.
Correct. So the my understanding, and Mark jump in at any stage, the ferry strategy so far, stage one, says that we will focus on existing routes but increase services, particularly weekends, as Mark just touched on, into peak and things like that. We see potential opportunities from and lessons learned from other places where there could be opportunities around fleet homogeneity and things like that, where it could give us a number of advantages.
Okay, that's great. The other question I've got just goes to cycleways, but also the concept of widening footpaths. It would appear from observations that you've got mobility scooters, you've got these other scooters that AT is allowing, you've got energised skateboards, you've got a whole lot of stuff now that's on the footpath, and obviously travel planning for schools, you want more young children on the footpaths. So is AT starting to actively promote and look at wider footpaths generally in its procurement and so on?
Just referring to a note that we provided to elected members on the 21st of September to...
Perhaps you could come back to me on that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, and the other...
Perhaps I could just add one thing to that, because you did mention schools in there. So I can add that when it comes to schools in our school programs, our TravelWise program that we embark on with most of the schools in the Auckland region, that is one of the things that we are looking at around schools. I can't speak to whether it's more widespread than that. It's not my area of expertise. But certainly around schools, that is something that we're looking at.
Okay, and the other question I've got is just around responsiveness as it goes to projects. So I've certainly observed, and people bring to my attention, changes that are made to the road network, let's say a wider roundabout, but all of a sudden that change means that there's a significant reduction in traffic flows, car flows in an area. It's not necessarily adding to any safety, but there's an obvious problem, and there have been other obvious problems in Greyland and other areas. So has AT got an active responsive program, so when you see that something's gone wrong and it needs to be adjusted, that you're actively visiting that and looking to make that change?
Yes, we absolutely do, and regularly make adjustments or changes to the network. I mean, one of the key purposes for my function existing at AT is to be responsive to and look at issues on the network, so that our network is essentially fit for purpose. But remember that fit for purpose is fit for purpose in terms of what that part of the network is there to deliver, not necessarily fit for purpose for what each and every individual believes it should be there to deliver.
Okay, and one last question, very quick. Are you on track to shift the vegetation control in the road corridor over to parks? Is that on track?
Yes, I can answer that. Yes, it is. We're still working with community facilities to roll it on track. There's nothing stopping that at the moment.
So what date are we looking at?
April, the town centre cleaning goes across in April and vegetation control goes across in June next year.
Okay.
Right, councillors, we're down to about a minute each for the 7 that are left. If we could just try and focus on the quarter ending 30th of June. It's pretty easy to flick across and it's interesting, but it's a reflection. Councillor Watson.
A couple of quick questions on the highlights for the last quarter. One, following on from the ferry, there was a ferry decline of 1.7%. There was a remark made about the funding constraint or cap or whatever you'd like to describe it with respect to the ferries. Certainly in my ward, we know there's more people wanting more services, so and it has had a big increase over the last decade. Is there money tagged specifically from the regional fuel tax that's going to ferries, or is it just in its usual kind of mode of having to compete with everything else that's going on?
Through you, Chair, our understanding is that there's nothing in terms of regional fuel tax in terms of ferries. What I would say to you at the moment too is that we are currently working with the Transport Agency around a plan for accelerated mode shift, which would potentially deliver additional funding, and in the short term the quickest way to accelerate mode shift is put on additional services. Ferry is a great candidate for that.
Okay, that's good, because often just one service can make a big difference, particularly at the peak time. My other question goes to some of the key deliverables that are coming up, and particularly as it goes to the park and rides. And I know there was an article just recently about looking at development around the park and rides, which in some instances has been on the go since 2015. How timely is there conceivably, because I think that would be something that would really strike a chord with certainly with people north of the bridge, in terms of even some sort of trial, given that we've got a number of park and rides that are just coming on stream or have had redevelopment. That would seem to be good timing to try some of the things that were getting talked about in that recent article.
Through you again, Chair. There are some specific developments in terms of park and ride that are called out in the RLTP for being delivered early in the 10-year period, but the large part of the funding for park and ride is not available until very late in the decade. Again, we are working with NZTA on an accelerated mode shift, and what we see is a real potential for accelerated mode shift from those areas further out in the region is park and ride. It's a great way to generate mode shift.
Yeah.
But it would be dependent upon additional funding or forward funding.
And finally, what about that notion of apartment developments above car parks, existing car parks and car parks that are coming on as a way of accelerating that development by generating that funding from those developments?
Yeah, so we are looking at that as an option, but there is also the potential to look at ancillary services. You think about click and collect, you think about dry cleaners, you think about potentially childcare centres. There is a lot of evidence elsewhere in the world where those opportunities may enable us to commercialise park and ride.
Very good. Councillor Fletcher.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've got 3 questions. The first relates under the period that we're evaluating, the comments around Mill Road. I think all of us understand that projects take many, many years in the making, and I'm just really, I know that there's been some timing changes, but why would you not continue some of that detailed work? Because it is going to be such a significant and important contribution to Auckland for the future. So I'd just like a little bit more insight into what you're doing and what your evaluation on that is for that period.
Through the Chair, Councillor, thank you for your question. Mill Road was, as you're aware and as I've shared with you before, long discussion as we went through the ATAP process. And government was very clear, gave us very clear direction on what part of Mill Road we would develop and what they'd fund. So we're working through that now to redesign, because we were planning on going out to tender with some work for Mill Road. That's now been withdrawn, and we are now rescoping based on what direction government gave us and what they funded.
So you've stopped doing any detailed design, because at some point in the future there will be a Mill Road. Because
no, Councillor, we haven't stopped any detailed design. We won't lose that detailed design. What we'll do is work with the government and NZTA on the component that they want. Also, we're working internally with Andrew Allen's team to look at how we use dynamic laning on that road, because it's been so successful up north, and how we do some more safety interventions. So we won't stop everything on it, but it's true we have had to recalculate where we are and revisit where we were up to.
Thank you for that clarification. The second question I have relates, and Councillor Simpson raised it earlier, but around the speed safety issue, whether or not, and I didn't have a chance to ask the question the other day when we were discussing it, whether you've looked at any of the Australian cities where they have a higher speed on the key arterials and a lower speed for safety reasons, and those streets, and particularly around schools and so forth. It just strikes me that we haven't looked at all international models. So in Australia, I think it's 60 on the key arterials, 40 on the smaller streets. I'd really just be interested in what research you've done and what models you've done, and you haven't just sort of picked one, but looked at it comprehensively.
Through the Chair, we have looked at it comprehensively. We've looked at a number of the Australian cities. We've looked, and actually, interestingly enough, our 40k speed zones are modelled around that, outside schools. We've looked at the States, a number of cities in the States. We've also looked at other parts of New Zealand, and we've looked quite close to home as well, to places like Ponsonby Road, where we lowered the speed some time, many years ago. We've looked at the results that have come from that. So we've taken a pretty wide range of models and research in arriving at what we think we should be doing in Auckland. But I do default back to our program is evidence-based. We know what's happening on the network, and we know what's causing those issues. And I will say that in a factor of every accident is speed. So speed either affects, excuse me.
I'm not disputing that.
Okay.
All I was asking, my question was to understand the level of research you've actually done in other places that would have relevance to Auckland. So my third question that I have of you is, and I was at the Mount Eden Residents Association last night, they still remain most upset with Auckland Transport, as you are well aware, and I welcomed the suggestions around placemaking. They asked, when they knew you were coming today, they said they were highlighting the fact that if you discount the supermarket and the petrol station, revenues for the retailers are down 40%, which they're directly attributing to you. So their novel idea was, given the bus route is Route 66, that you go through and do a bit of placemaking and make it a bit more sexy through there, and actually help those retailers come back to life. So there could be a Route 66 that you could put on the table. So I leave that with you as a thought.
Thank you, Councillor. Can I just go back to your previous question? I understand that all councillors have been sent a copy of the Road Safety Business Improvement Review.
Yep.
That Business Improvement Review was done by Eric Howard from Victoria and Melbourne. He is a recognised Australian expert. If you have any questions on the Business Improvement Review and the evidence that is quite clear in that, then we would be happy to take those questions from you at another time.
Is that on the hub for councillors?
it was emailed.
HUD won't work
Should,
anyway.
yeah, should be, but if not, we will provide it to you again. But it is very clear, it's a very comprehensive review.
Thank you.
Councillor Cooper.
Thank you. I probably won't, I'll ask one question, but I'll just comment rather than waiting for an answer. Around cycleway maintenance program, I just hope there is one. But just commenting, following on from Councillor Simpson's comments, most cycleways are in the shoulder of the road and they're not cleaned, and that is a significant safety issue because you have to ride outside the shoulder to avoid the gravel, the bits of cars and everything else.
Branches.
And I don't see a regular maintenance program, and that would keep the maggots that we're called that ride on the road and on our cycles out of the way, because at the moment quite often you can't ride in that shoulder because it's so messy. And I do send through photographs, but I don't see any improvement, so that would be good. The other thing for me, I don't see any mention of city centre to northwest light rail here at all. There's lots of mention of Mangere, CC to Mangere, but nothing about a rapid transit network to the northwest, and that's a real omission, I think. So what is going to happen and how are you involved?
Oh, sorry, it was the Herald.
Not even a busway, nothing, just the same old do some roads in Kumeu.
Through you, Chair, as you'll appreciate, that's a project being led by NZTA.
So CCTM as well.
Yes, so the
that's
priority.
why I'm asking.
Yes, so the priority at this stage is on
Bob
city.
me off with that, I'm sorry. Sorry, carry on.
So the focus at this stage is on city centre to Mangere. The project to the northwest is less advanced at this stage, but we are happy to provide updates for you either separately or offline.
And I apologise for being rude there. I spoke to the Minister and he said that he wants to advance them at the same time, so I'd be really interested. That's what he said to me in his office a couple of months ago, whether that's a happening thing or not, but if there is, I'd really like to be kept up to date, thanks, because we've been waiting far too long for something. And it's not your fault because, the whole goalposts have changed, but we will have a significant part to play because we'll probably have to provide a lot of the infrastructure along the way.
We are very aware of that, and the CEO of Council and I, who sit on a CEO's group for Light Rail, are trying to advocate in terms of making sure that Council and local boards are kept in the loop in terms of the progress on the project.
Appreciate that.
Councillor Stewart.
Oh, thank you. Just a couple of things. Just how much is it actually costing us, Auckland Transport, for footpath renewals in the Auckland region?
Can I come back to you with a number on that?
Okay, because the reason I'm asking is that I know that in my ward, and I know it's all over the place, I know that there's a lot of the footpath renewals are caused by tree roots, and I have been working with some of the arborists out my way, and just some streets in particular, it's been like a skateboard park, and we've had mobility scooters, and we've had people with broken hips, and I even tripped over once and I ended up having an ambulance have to come to me on Pickeringa Road. So that's one of the questions, and just one other, just on these lime scooters that we've now got, you see all over the place and they're whizzing around. If anybody gets hurt, because it is really a health and safety thing, who is going to be responsible? I mean, if you're an elderly person and you get one of these are whizzing past you and you get hurt and you end up breaking your hip and perhaps your whole life is completely destroyed. So is there any sort of insurance or the company that has these on our shared footpaths, is there going to be any sort of insurance? Because, and it is a really serious question because we have cyclists that are cycling and nearly get bowled over just walking across Aotea, but with these scooters and they are trip hazards. I've just coming down Queen Street today, I saw somebody almost tripping over a couple of cycles that were lying around the road. Thank Footpath.
Councillor, can we revert to you on that question with a response?
Yes, thank you. And maybe we could have the response for all the councillors.
Sure. No problem.
Councillor Bartley. No? All right, we're racing along. Councillor Newman.
Thank you. Maybe you could come back. Maybe you could come back to me with answers in slower time here. With respect to your KPI 2, which is rail boardings, just having a look at the breakdown by station, boardings and alighting. In Homai, there's been about a 6.8% reduction in 17-18 compared to 16-17. It's a bit dated now, but I assume that that's still about where we're at. And at Maniarewa, we're down by 7.2%. That's a big gated station. I'm assuming that actually probably the most likely outcome, the reason for that is changes to the bus route and timetable. There needs to be some more inquiry there, and I'd appreciate if Auckland Transport could have a look at the reasons for the decline in boardings and alighting at those 2 stations, that's Homai and Maniarewa, and I can email you and talk to you offline about that. That's the first thing. Second thing is I want to thank you for the work, the pilot that's been underway in the Maniarewa Papakura ward around complaints and queries to the call centre and the management of that. I think that as you improve over time, the likely outcome will be that you will get more and more and more inquiries, which is actually a good thing because people will have confidence. And the third thing is, I guess, with respect to KPI measure 30, the percentage of sealed local road network and resurfaced. My concern there is not only that you hit the target because you're quite a long way short, but that in so doing that the reseal guidelines that Auckland Transport needs to apply in relation to roads with which exceed 10,000 vehicle movements per day, that you are not only sealing, but you are sealing to a higher standard, which means using concrete in the asphalt, because otherwise you will be going through 12 months of defects with your external contractors, as you've talked about, and I will be on your case about that. So I would like you to reflect to me in slower time. And the last thing, if I may, taking up what Councillor Stewart said, I think that the footpath repairs that you've done in Conifer Grove and Wattle Downs are beautiful, but undoubtedly the problem in Conifer Grove, for example, is the deciduous trees which are well past their use-by date, and the protection of those deciduous trees, which of course leaf fall and the root system, it's just destroying the footpaths. So that must cause a real cost to you at the back end, and somehow we have to get a balanced approach to these trees. Yes, they are healthy and mature, but actually you could argue that those trees have to be replaced by low maintenance trees that don't cause as much disruption. I'd be interested to know your views on that, and I'll write to you about those matters too. Thank you.
Good, you don't need to answer them at the moment. Councillor Hill.
Thank you, and just a few comments and then questions. Just generally, congratulations on the almost 70% increase in public transport trips in the last 8 years, which is pretty phenomenal. And the cycling, 15% increase from compared to September last year to September this year on the 26 counters we have, which is massive. And the other thing is the new network. So congratulations on the North new network. We did some volunteering in the mornings over there. There was that 40-minute hiccup at Constellation, but generally going there the rest of the week, everyone was pretty happy. There were some other small minor issues we've been following up, but I think on the whole most people have been pretty quiet and pretty happy. So hopefully we see those 9 to 10% increases soon, like we have seen in other new network areas. So I guess I've got one question around your feedback or any stats you have on the new network. What I haven't, I've only had anecdotal And the other one is my one gripe, or it's a kind of wider gripe, just on, and I sent you a whole raft of pictures the other day, but just the general kind of response on just the cleanliness of streets, but also signs. That's contractor issue, but signs blocking footpaths, cycleways all around the city, and it's just constant getting feedback from people. I know it's a contractor issue, and I think it's written into their contracts not to put it on cycleways or footpaths, but it keeps happening, and it's just really laborious to follow them all up. And then it, and I said the other day at the city centre workshop that if a sign fell in the middle of the road, we would have, within an hour someone come and sort that out. But when it's in a cycleway or a walkway and you can't navigate that at all, when we're getting, our main focus is safety, and people are having to walk on the road or not pass at all, and it seems to take days to get contractors to move there. And they're just big, giant, unnecessary signs in a lot of cases which say road end or road works on side street. I just think somehow we need to, as we get more people walking and cycling, that this is going to become a much bigger issue, and it's just really painful to follow up all the time. So if we can get out to the contractors, like just stop it or tie some signs to other signs or using berms, I don't know, but it's just growing that issue. So I think the big stuff is great, and look at the massive increase in capital spending, that's amazing, but I think it's just those little things that people start to notice that get a bit frustrating. So.
Through you, Chair. I'll take the first one and then I'll pass to Tony on the second one. So this week is actually the first week where school's back, obviously, and then it's touch wood. Things are going very well on the New North network. We appreciate the support that we've had from councillors for the New North network and all the networks that we've done. And it's great to see councillors out there with our people on weekends who are volunteering their time to help the community and our customers get used to the change. And that often isn't seen, that our people are doing it voluntarily. So I just bring that to your attention. But yes, the challenge at Constellation, for example, and I don't want to make a big deal about it because otherwise it's gone very, very well. And if you look at other cities in the world, they've had a number of challenges introducing new bus networks.
Or Wellington.
Other cities in the world. Constellation is actually being brought about because of the overwhelming success of the Northern Busway and a system and a network which, 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago when it first went into service, who would have imagined the success? And that's some of the challenges we now have on rail and the Northern Busway and other places in terms of how successful this has been. So far, so good in terms of that. But again, we appreciate your support around the new network. Tony, do you want to tackle the question?
Yeah, just in dealing with the signage one, the temporary traffic management signage, as you highlight for constructions, is an issue. We're well aware of that. We're working through, working with the contractors to try and find better ways of doing that. It is a challenge because many places, we are constrained in the corridor to do things, but it's almost like we just need a bit of a pragmatic approach to making the right choices, and that's what we're working with them on, is rather than the big stick, which doesn't always get us the right outcome at the moment. So we can come back to you on a progress of how that's playing out.
Cool, thank you. And one last tiny question. I know it's coming to the next board meeting, the Northcote Ferry Wharf, and I know I've been banging on about it for 8 years now, but I feel really concerned if we don't get a long-term outcome for that, not just for the current visitors, but the Sky Path and the Sea Path issues and the return trips and that whole thing. So I know it's being looked at, and I want to just also thank the team for really rushing through a whole lot of work on that, but just want to put it further out there that we're really keen for a good outcome in there.
Wrapping it up, Member Taylor.
Oh, perfect. Kia ora, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I just wanted to say thanks for the comprehensive reporting on Māori outcomes, which actually goes across all the CCOs, Mr. Chairman, and also providing the financial narrative against those items. So I'm all about congratulations. Thanks.
Very good.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Shane, and thank you. Welcome, Mark and Vanessa. You don't have to say much, but, and the rest of the team. And we'll give a vote of thanks at the end. So it's official resolution. So we're going to have a 10-minute break. We are back. 5-minute break, I've just been told. So 10-2. That'll give you 6 minutes.
How long is the 5-minute break for?
3 minutes.
6 minutes.